Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tovo's boots. I finally have a pair, and they are handmade, high quality, stylish, comfortable, and I even got them customized with leather stamping. So go get yours at the Tovo's flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, Tovo's is opening a brand new store for your Western wear needs on Main Street in Georgetown. Swing by for their grand opening party September 27th through 29th for live music and freebies for the first 50 of y'all to get there. So come shop with me at Tovo's. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, we're continuing our mayoral interviews of all 5 candidates for Austin mayor. And now we bring you our 4th candidate, Kathie Tovo. She spent more than a decade on Austin City Council and helped to steer the city through big transitions and challenges. She joins me today to tell us why she wants to be Austin's next mayor. A quick note here, we asked all of the mayoral candidates the same questions except for one that was specific to them, and we didn't edit this interview or others very much, but we did cut out any references they made about their opponents because we'd asked folks not to do that. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tovo's. It's Tuesday, October 15th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here today with Kathie Tovo, former city council member, adjunct faculty member at UT, and current mayoral candidate. Right away, tell us who you are and why you're running for mayor.
Well, I'm Kathie Tovo, and I had the incredible privilege of serving on the Austin City Council for 3 terms, 1 on the at-large council and then 2 representing City Council District 9. And as part of my service on the council, I also served for 4 of those years as mayor pro tem as we were making the transition with the brand new 10-1 council. I'm running for mayor because I'm committed to open and transparent government, and I believe we need someone in the mayor's seat who can steer the city council in that direction. I'm running because I believe we need a climate champion in the mayor's seat. I'm committed to working on issues of affordability and have lots of ideas for how we could really move the bar in terms of affordable housing in the city. And I'm excited about being able to be mayor and really leverage the experience and the expertise I gained as a council member to that role and really making progress on initiating programs and other kinds of resources for Austin and making sure that we're really creating a city where everybody can thrive.
What makes you qualified to be mayor of Austin specifically?
Well, I started my interest in city issues as a community member. And I think that's probably my number one qualification. You know, I got involved in my neighborhood association and then served on some commissions. And having had that experience really made me a much better council member. And so, you know, as a council member, I was able to work on a whole range of issues, from initiating things like resilience hubs, places of refuge during emergencies, and also community resource centers during Blue Sky Days. I was able to lead the council in opening the Sobering Center, which was an idea that had gotten started with a lot of enthusiasm 16 or so years earlier, long before I got on the council, but had failed, had run into obstacles and failed to move forward. But having had that experience as a community member, and then really that in-depth experience as a council member working on city budgets, serving as the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee, being out there working with constituents on a whole range of issues, makes me really well prepared for the role of mayor. And that additional 4 years as mayor pro tem was a great learning opportunity. I got to facilitate the council meetings multiple times. I had the opportunity to represent the city to visitors, and also, you know, to represent on a national and an international level several times. And so, you know, I'm very excited about how as mayor I can really leverage that expertise to really advance the ball in several areas.
So, you know, Austin is growing like crazy. Let's say I've been here 2 years, right? I'm new, I'm fresh, I'm new to the city. Maybe I don't have all of the information that I should have, and I'm voting for mayor. If I if you want to reach me and you're like, Austinite, if you care about blank in Austin, you need to vote for Kathie Tovo as mayor. What is that blank? If Austinites care about blank, what's your top priority?
About government that puts people first.
Nice.
That has been core to the work that I did as a council member, and it is core to the work I'm going to do as mayor. We need a mayor who puts people first. We need a city council and a local government that puts people first, not the moneyed interests, but really focuses on how we can, as mayor, help continue to build Austin, seize those opportunities to make sure that Austin is a place where, every working family can thrive.
Along those lines, Austin and its housing, as you mentioned earlier, are not affordable to many people. And if we're talking about putting people first, how would you approach that?
Let me start by saying, affordability in this community is a huge challenge. As I talk to Austinites throughout the city and knock on their doors, many of them are struggling. No matter where they live in town, they're struggling to keep up with the high cost of housing. If they're homeowners, that means paying property taxes. If they're renters, those property taxes are being passed along to them in terms of rent. And so, this has got to be a key priority for the city council and for the mayor. It is really challenging to intervene in those market forces that are driving up the cost of land, but there are some things that we can and should do. One, we need to be very careful about the kind of zoning changes and land use changes that get made. The current council made a lot of them. I and many others in the community are concerned that these will drive up further the cost of land. And, so I do think it's important to look at ways to potentially mitigate that, making sure that we're prohibiting short-term rentals on those tracts. If there is a way to include, work with communities, especially our communities that were identified in the Uprooted report and were identified as at risk of very vulnerable to gentrification and displacement, working with those communities to develop an equity overlay that would treat them a little bit differently is really critical to make sure that we're making sure that we're doing everything we can to minimize the impact on families who want to stay in their neighborhoods. There are some proactive things we can do. As a council member, I passed the right to return policy, which gives preference to families, to individuals who have been displaced from Austin or are at risk of being displaced. If they have long-term generational ties to Austin, they get priority in some of our City of Austin housing developments. And so there are some real proactive ways that we can help longtime Austin residents stay in Austin. And it needs to be, it needs to be across the board. The mayor needs to be a champion of other kinds of things that help family budgets, from working and continuing to support public transportation, which can reduce individuals' costs of transportation, to being, a champion for childcare, access to affordable, high-quality childcare for families with kids. Childcare is usually the number 2 cost. So, all of these have to be part of the mix as we think about, how we help Austinites stay in Austin, how we help them, have a great quality of life, pay their rent, pay their bills. Those all have to be in the mix. And of course, working to support workforce solutions as well.
And how would you see us fixing those zoning issues and the land use stuff? How would you see that?
Yeah, there are some ways we can tweak what has passed. Number one, we can put in strict requirements that new units filed under the home permits cannot be investor-owned short-term rentals. The city council passed an amendment that does appear to restrict it for lots that have 2 units, but they did not restrict it for lots that have 3.
Right.
So for those permits moving forward with 3 units, as I understand the conversation that transpired between legal and council at one of their work sessions, 2 of those units can be short-term rentals 100% of the time. So that doesn't create housing, that creates hotels. And we need to fix that.
Right.
And as your mayor, I'm committed to doing so. The council is continuing to look at an equity overlay. And I regard that as super, super important to doing, what I just described, of really looking at those areas that are that were identified as vulnerable to gentrification and displacement, and really working with those communities on proposals that look different in those areas, that really work to help folks stay in their neighborhood. And that will look different from area to area. But I think the impacted community should be, collaborating on those solutions. That should not be a top-down process. I do think there are some environmental considerations with what the council has passed, and those need to be mitigated as well. I've heard lots of concerns about flooding, lots of concerns about potential of wildfire risk, and those are also things that with some more deliberation, some more thought, can be better addressed, as well as potential infrastructure improvements to make sure that increased density is being matched by increased investments in infrastructure.
In case there's someone here that doesn't understand or doesn't know what an equity overlay is, first of all, can we just talk about exactly what that is and just a clear understanding of what the taxpayer pool may be when it comes to that?
So there is no additional cost. There is not a cost to it.
Wow.
During Code Next, this idea surfaced for the first time, and it was making use of a study that had been done for the city of Austin by UT. They had looked at different neighborhoods in the city of Austin to see which ones had gentrified to quite a bit, but which ones were still relatively affordable for moderate income, lower income individuals. And so that was primarily the areas that were identified as being really vulnerable to displacement. And the advice was, proceed carefully with zoning changes in these areas. We're primarily in our Eastern Crescent, representing a lot of communities of color. And so those are areas that, according to the analysis and according to the discussion we had, should really be treated a little bit differently, because we don't want to pass policies that are going to incentivize redevelopment, that are going to make it harder for neighbors in those areas to stay in that neighborhood, as if it drives up land costs. And so, I think that's good advice that we received. We had a lot of conversation at the time. There's a lot of consensus on that council to move forward with an equity overlay. And in the last conversations that the current council has had, there were lots of community members asking, please, work on an equity overlay, treat the properties that fall within these areas differently, so that we're not causing unintended harm to the families within those areas and making it tougher for them to stay, really increasing displacement.
Okay, let's say you are elected mayor, right? And you can basically summon anyone you want for a long lunch to talk about things like this. Who is the first person you'd want to have a long talk with to get a pulse on this city?
Oh my gosh. One person is really, really challenging.
Fair.
I'll answer it this way. As a council member, it was really important to me to hear directly from members of the public. And, that meant sitting in a lot of sometimes very long council meetings, because we had lots of public testimony.
Right.
And, I found that really invigorating, because in the course of a day, you would hear so many different opinions on an issue sometimes, and some great ideas. And, as mayor, that's exactly, the kind of process I want to have, is really listening out, being out there in the community, listening to a diversity of opinion and ideas. And so, as I envision myself in that role, it is really sitting throughout the community with different groups of people and hearing their thoughts on it, because I think that's how we make progress, really bringing in a diversity of opinions. And so I don't know that I don't know that I would feel comfortable picking just one person, because that's not ever been the way
I think that's a fair response, actually. It's an honest response.
Yeah, it is. And we've had a lot of, as I'm out on the campaign trail, I hear concerns about the development process, and that if permitting and developing went more smoothly, that could help reduce some costs. I would love to see, for example, a task force of industry professionals providing us with those ideas.
Yeah.
Hearing from our staff in those departments. And, there are sometimes obstacles for them to talk directly to council, but we can set up a process at the city manager overseas, where staff members can directly give that kind of feedback, because those are the people who are in a great position to be able to suggest process changes that could be impactful. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're not always just throwing money at problems. I mean, we certainly invested more in our development services, just as to follow through with that example, but we're still hearing concerns about the process. So, getting folks in a room, getting folks around a table who can suggest changes from their lived experience, from their experience with the city of Austin, is something I'm super interested in.
Do you have a top three? Like if we're talking about community, do you have a top three organizations or people that you'd be like, you know what? You know who needs to be in on this conversation? This person. Do you know who we need to talk to? Because they have access to communities that could help your reach.
Well, I worked a lot on issues of homelessness. When we switched to the district-based system, I represented City Council District 9, and many of my constituents were individuals experiencing homelessness. At the time, the highest percentage of unsheltered individuals were within District 9. And so I worked a lot with groups like the Ending Community Homelessness Organization. They were a group I talked to a lot. I worked a lot with some of the social service providers in that area. And one really great summer, we were working together and talking together about how to make changes that would really improve services for individuals accessing the Arch and the Salvation Army and some of the other services in the downtown area. And we were joined in those conversations by individuals with lived experience. And I think that was probably the most impactful and best work we did, was really listening to those voices. So, the world and the conversations around homelessness have changed dramatically since the ones we had back in 2011 when I was first elected, and being led by organizations that are really in close conversation with individuals with lived experience, or there is a group that is comprised of individuals with lived experience. They really need to help shape and lead some of those solutions. And so, the Other Ones Foundation, the Urban League, other organizations that are now working in this space are bringing new ideas and really good ideas to the table. And so those those are just some of the groups that I would be working in close conversation with as we move forward on what is one of the most pressing challenges.
There's a lot of concern about how often the state, I will say, dips its toes into Austin's ins and outs. How would you approach or change things in this ongoing power struggle between the state of Texas, and I'm going to say it, versus the city of Austin? Because a lot of times it seems like that. Mm-hmm. How would you approach or change this relationship?
That is one of just the factors of being in Austin, and I've been watching that longer than I've served on council. In fact, went down to some hearings as a community member when some of Austin's policies were up for conversation at the legislature. I want to start by saying we have an incredible local delegation here in Austin, and they are super supportive and have done just a great job of fending off some of the attacks on Austin through the years. And I really just value their work. I am going to do everything I can to represent the city well, and that means being down there to defend our policies at the legislature when called to do so. Had an opportunity to do that as mayor pro tem at times, and always made myself available, because it is important that they hear directly from some of the elected leaders who passed the policies that are now being called up for question, because we're in direct relationship with our constituents, and that's why and how we do our work. And so, they need to hear from people who are directly in touch with the constituents who asked for and supported these changes that they may be considering in one of their committees. I'm going to do everything I can to build relationships with representatives outside of Austin, and to continue, the work that we need to do with other major cities in Texas, as well as towns throughout. The elected leaders, that represent groups that are all active in things like the Texas Municipal League, can be a powerful force and have been able to, to collaborate together in pushing for good changes, and sometimes pushing against bad ones. And, at the end of the day, we have a job to do. as mayor and council representing the people who live in this city and depend on us to introduce good policy and programs and to fight for them when called to do so. And I'm going to do that job and do it well.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about housing, short-term rentals. And in 2016, Austin passed new regulations on short-term rentals, and short-term rentals have exploded in town, sped up gentrification, specifically on the east side. And then right before you left City Council in 2022, Council passed your resolution meant to bar unregistered short-term rentals from operating in Austin. But I mean, to your point you mentioned earlier, you started looking into this in 2012. And you said way back then that things were moving too quickly and we needed to get on top of it. So here we are in 2024 and nothing has been put in place. And it kind of feels like it's money left on the table, not collecting those taxes, like millions of dollars that could potentially go in hot taxes.
Mm-hmm.
If you are elected mayor, is this something that you're going to pick back up? And do you have a solution about how to get that on track and get control of that?
Yes. The answer to your question is yes. Back when we were first discussing this, I think I was a neighborhood president way back when we first started to see them, and they were new on the market and nobody knew how to respond. And I remember being on council when we passed the first regulations, and my colleague Laura Morrison and I wrote a letter to the editor, wrote an op-ed in the Statesman talking about how concerned we were that these would start to occupy housing in areas where we really needed those long-term opportunities for folks. And so it has been very frustrating to respond to it. And at one point, I even had our city staff kind of do an overlay of the schools that were losing enrollment with the proliferation of short-term rentals to try to see if there was a correspondence. And it does seem like there may be, at least at that time. So we need to get a handle on it. We have been limited by some of the court cases in how we can respond. But I will say, I see other cities who are within the same, court umbrella doing more and being more proactive in terms of responding. I did pass that resolution shortly before leaving council, and it was designed to work within the new legal environment, but it has not moved forward. And so this was one that was going to require the platforms to make sure that they were only listing licensed operators. Seemed like a very reasonable provision, but again, it hasn't moved forward. We also need to do a better job enforcing the provisions that we have on the books. I mean, that just has been an ongoing frustration. We've invested more and more in Austin code, but the hours of the code inspectors don't correspond when the problems happen. And so there needs to be the city manager needs to understand that there are changes that need to happen, and he needs to enforce them within Austin code, because we need to be able to enforce our ordinances. We do know, and periodically some of the platforms will come forward and say, you're missing out on these hotel occupancy tax dollars, and they should, as they have in some other areas, turn it over with the data about who they've collected it from. That seems to be the standstill. They do not want to provide the information about who they've collected it to. And so the city would be in a position potentially of taking in money from short-term rentals that don't have the legal ability to operate within our city. And that's just not right. And so we need to do a better job of, again, requiring the platforms to do their job of making sure that they're not listing short-term rentals that don't have the legal ability to operate here.
Do you have any example of any kind of things that you've seen that work elsewhere that you would want to bring here? Are there specific ideas that you've seen work, or ways that have, not just ideas, but just like systems, like specifically processes that have worked in other cities that you'd like to bring here?
Well, I believe that I got this idea from one of the other cities, and now I've forgotten which one, though I think it was a relatively new provision and I'm not sure how it's working. But, I have definitely read about some other cities that are doing a better job of enforcing the regulations they have. And I think we have a lot to learn from those for sure. When we first in Austin passed the regulations, nobody was really talking about the impact on housing availability. That seemed to be, more of the focus was on party houses or the disruption that some of the short-term rentals cause for their neighbors. But there was less conversation going on about the impact on housing overall. now that is really something that you hear nationally, that lots of different communities are having those conversations about, gosh, we have too many. We have people, in a housing crisis, this isn't helpful to have so many structures be turned over to being hotels.
But now the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? I think that I like the idea of coming in hot and just trying to figure out a way to force the platforms to adhere to the rules, because it just feels like there are rules there. They're not adhering to the rules, and we're not forcing them to adhere to the rules.
And it would be helpful.
Yes.
It would be helpful if the city passed a rule along the lines of my resolution. They haven't yet. So, I'm not sure why it's taking so long. I know I've heard a lot of conversations about they want to do a comprehensive overview. Well, comprehensive is super, but let's do what we can do in the meantime, and really get some good provisions on the books that can start to impact change. And I want to be clear, I'm talking about investor-owned short-term rentals, the ones that are 100% of the time short-term rentals. I know and talk to, a lot of neighbors and folks around the city who want the ability to rent out their properties as short-term rentals for a couple weekends a year during ACL or some of the other big weekends, and that helps them pay their taxes.
That's a good distinction.
I'm 100% supportive of that. I think that's great. That is a balanced approach. It allows them to bring in some additional help for their property taxes.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
I'm really talking about the investor-owned ones.
So do you think that because of the housing crisis, that we could we just loosen the regulations a little bit and work with the companies and collect the hot tax? Or does there need to be a strong arm approach? You know what I mean? Is there a way to compromise and meet in the middle? Or does it just need to be this almost forcing of them to do it our way? Or is there a way to loosen things up a little bit?
Well, it's been a long while since the city had conversations with any of the platform operators, at least since I have.
Okay.
And so, I might start there and see, maybe we can find a middle ground. Maybe now there are enough other cities that where they operate that they turn over the money and the data where it's not as much of an issue anymore.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's possible we may, I'm always going to look for, places of agreement.
Right.
Much easier to work from places of agreement. And that's been my approach on other policy issues with my colleagues. And that's going to certainly be my approach on this one. But I do think it's important that we have rules, we have a process to license. We need folks to be licensed. It's really not fair to the good actors. It's not fair to, the homeowner who is going through the process.
Seems like a small request.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It creates a level playing field, and that's the way the city needs to operate.
Yeah. I have a personal question, not personal, but my favorite question that I want to ask. If you could bring back any music venue to the city that we've lost over the years, which one would you bring back and why?
Oh gosh, I'm picking favorites, but I would bring back the Armadillo.
Oh.
Because I never went to the Armadillo World Headquarters when it was here, but it's such an icon of Austin. It did so much to help build the music scene here, and so many of us never experienced it. And I think it's, was just fundamental to kind of the city that Austin became. And so, that's the one I would bring back.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
You're not someone coming from nowhere. Do you have anything that you want to add in closing to people that may know your name and may not know your name?
Yeah, I just say, I would end where I started. It was an incredible privilege to serve on the Austin City Council. We were able to get a lot of good work done alongside my colleagues, but also, with projects I initiated. And, it was a challenging span of years. We had wildfires. We had 2 major floods with losses of life. We had the bombings, Winter Storm Uri, a global pandemic. I mean, those were some challenging issues. And, I certainly grew through all of those experiences and really am just energized at the idea of getting back into the work. I've got a lot of projects that I'm interested in seeing forward, but the policies, I did a lot of policy work, tremendous policy work, never stopped doing policy work until, 5 o'clock on the day that they turned off my email on that Friday where they were swearing in the new council members. So my staff, I had an incredible staff. We were working on constituent issues all the time, but also got some good policy and programs in place. But one of the opportunities as mayor is to really leverage partnerships in the community to bring great value. And that's the part that I'm super excited about, because to end homelessness in this city, we're going to need to have super strong partnerships, not just with Travis County, some of the other entities, but with our private sector. We have made a substantial investment at the city of Austin. I'm really proud of that investment of federal dollars and also city dollars in ending homelessness. But we have more work to do, and the private sector needs to be a part of that. And the mayor is in a unique position to be able to be that champion. We have incredible work that we can do with our school district. And again, I did a lot of that as a council member, building those partnerships, supporting things like the family resource centers, after school programs. All of that was work I helped lead. But we have a lot of opportunities ahead. And the mayor can and should be a champion of public education here in the city of Austin, working not just with AISD, but the other school districts that fall within our city limits. And so, that is something that I really believe I can bring to this job. Having had the experience as a council member, I'm really prepared to step into that role and look for those partnerships that allow us to leverage resources on behalf of the people we serve, the people of Austin.
And I know that this is a busy time for you, so I appreciate you coming and sitting down with me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kathie.
Yeah. And the conversations, I really encourage folks to come to some of the debates and some of the forums, because the conversations are really interesting. And it's one of the wonderful things about campaigns is that, you hear a lot of ideas and the public is involved asking questions, and, that can help shape policy no matter who gets elected. So that's a wonderful part of elections here in Austin.
That's great advice. Everybody should definitely come to the forums and the debates, because your power lies, locally.
That's right.
Much stronger than nationally. I know that's a hard pill to swallow, but your voice really matters on the local level. That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find the link to Kathie's campaign site in our show notes. We've already interviewed Doug Greco, Jeffrey Bowen, and Carmen Yanez Pulido, and you'll hear from the remaining candidate for mayor next week. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.